and welcome to an awesome day of FileMaker Training. I'm Richard Carlton, creator of fmtraining.tv, where every day at this time slot we are doing awesome FileMaker training, and frequently we get to bring other people with us who are frankly better than we are at doing this. In fact, a lot of times the best live streams are the ones where I get to learn something along the way, so that's what's going to happen today. Before we get that, let's cover the upcoming broadcast schedule. So really, I need to come up the broadcast, the upcoming schedule, and then what's transpired the last couple of days. So I'm going to press the button right here. So this is the upcoming broadcast schedule as soon as this loads. And so Tuesday, past Tuesday, a couple days ago, Claris in the morning shipped the FileMaker 2024 release. Rick Kalman and Doug Wallace was here on Tuesday to kind of cover the beginnings of the FileMaker 2024 release. AKA, if we're technical people, we call it version 21. And then yesterday was kind of a server overview. For the most part, we talked about persistent cache. That video is in post-production, will come out later today. And so once again, you have the option of watching the video, watching the stream live on YouTube, Twitch, Discord. So high definition on all three streams, so we're triple casting at the same time. Now, my job during the show today is to monitor the questions on the different areas here. Tuesday, Wednesday was Claris here, and then today, the rest of this event for the next 7 days, counting today, tomorrow, and all next week, we're continuing to hammer away at the details on FileMaker 2024. And so today and tomorrow, Wim Decorte from Soliant. Soliant's been a top shelf FileMaker consultancy for many, many years, and you can always count on Wim at Soliant to basically is like a Jacob Taylor, right? Or Jacob Taylor's like him. I'm not gonna they're very similar people. So, Jacob, this guy really, really knows his stuff. And so as a result, instead of me trying to tell you like, I'm Richard, I'm a server expert, why don't we just bring in the top shelf people and bring them to the show? Why don't we just do that? That way I can learn something along the way, be much better that way. So today is going to be on Let's Encrypt. If you don't know what that is, we'll explain to you momentarily. Tomorrow is going to be cleanup on this conversation today and open Q&A. I know that the live stream people who come to this show love open Q&A in general, and they definitely love it on server because there's a million possible questions to ask. So my job is to kind of triage the questions. So some of you ask about, where is FileMaker Go for Android? Okay, I'm going to filter that one out today. And we're going to restrict the questions, hopefully to mostly server topics that are reasonably on topic. Tomorrow will be a little bit more open-ended on that. And my job is to feed them through and then to Wim, and then these two can wrestle. Although every time they talk, they agree with each other. So I don't know that much conversation there. So I'm going to welcome Wim Decorte. Hello, Wim. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for being here.
I'm very glad that you're here, actually, because it's always smart to have the smart people in the show. So, Wim, you are awesome. You want to give us a 30-second background on who you are and why you're so awesome?
I can't speak for the latter part, but my name is Wim Decorte, born and raised in Belgium, lived in, 7 countries on 2.5 continents, doing FileMaker work everywhere. It's FileMaker that took me to all of these places. I've been with Soliant for coming up to 15 years. I lead the FileMaker, or the Claris, I should say now, the Claris side of the house. We got 4 subdivisions, if you will, within Soliant. We got AWS, Salesforce, Claris, and basically what we call cloud native apps. So the FileMaker piece is the biggest. It's the oldest. We've been around for 25 years, thereabouts. Right. So I started doing FileMaker mid-90s, last century. And I've never really looked back, so I've been enjoying it ever since.
Well, we're glad you're here. So what is today's topic? Okay, this is what I always tell people. What are you talking about today, and why should I give it?
We'll be talking about SSL certificates for the most part. Happy to field any other questions, but SSL certificates is something that has or continues to be a pain point for a lot of people in the community, right? So either they don't understand why they need them, and if they're convinced that they need them, or they grudgingly agree to install one, they run into trouble, don't understand what's going on. So that's really what we're going to talk about. So we'll go over some of the basics if people want it. Specifically, this version of FileMaker Server comes with support scripts to get a free SSL certificate from Let's Encrypt. It's been a feature that's been in much demand ever since SSL certificates became a thing. Because typically you have to go out and buy an SSL certificate, right, from a commercial provider. These things are dirt cheap, right? We're talking about $5, $10 per year for an SSL certificate. If you go with a wildcard, and we can get into what a wildcard is at some point, it sets you back maybe $30, $40 if you go with a decent provider. Sure, you can go to the GoDaddies and pay 300 or 500, but that's your choice, right? Like you don't have to. So although these commercial certificates are really, really cheap, people still want something for free, right? That's what Let's Encrypt comes into play. And we'll talk about what that feature is in FileMaker Server and how you can use it. And of course, me being me, I'll explain how you can do what Claris gave you and do it better.
Which is awesome. All right, Mr. Taylor, you can jump in here too. I'm going to let you guys show your screen, Mr. Wim, if you want.
You'll have the links to all of these blog posts in the session notes there. But together with all the content that we put out there specifically around the features in FileMaker 21, this one is sort of like a companion, mainly because the underlying struggle, if you will, with a lot of people in the community with SSL certificates. Why do I need one? How do I go about getting it? Now that I get one, how do I install it? So I basically did a big brain dump last week on everything that I know on SSL certificates, from the conceptual to the practical. Like, what does it do? Why do you need to care? And how do you go about getting one? And what does it all mean, right? So there's a lot of stuff in there. Also, I want to call this out, right? What else do I need? Because that's typically where people fail when it comes to SSL certificates, right? It's actually, let me jump into that because it's kind of important, right? An SSL certificate does two things, really, conceptually. It validates that the name of the server you're trying to connect to is actually the server that you're connecting to, right? So if I go to what I have there as the name fms.domain.com, so if I'm the client and I'm connecting to that, it will basically certify that you are in fact connecting to a server by that name. It's kind of important, right? Because it protects against man-in-the-middle attacks or somebody impersonating me, all of these good things. So the name validation is the first important part of what an SSL certificate does. The other one is the obvious one. It encrypts the data in transit, right? So anything that I send, anything that I receive between myself and that server gets encrypted. And the client and the server will do a little bit of chatting in the beginning to basically agree on a protocol and a cipher and all of these good things. We don't need to go into that. Just know that all the data is encrypted. But the name validation is important, right? Like if I'm the client here on the right-hand side and I want to connect to the server over here, the typical way that it goes is that my client will, by virtue of using the name, will have to connect to a name server, right? Because traffic on the internet, traffic on your network doesn't go by name, it goes by IP address. So if we have the name here, at some point, we got to get an IP address for that. So that's what happens from a DNS server. You give it a name, it gives you back the IP address. So that then basically you make the connection with the IP address. At the edge of your network, you'll have a router that says, oh, you got traffic from me. I can see by the ports that this is FileMaker traffic. I have a rule that is configured on my router to do port forwarding straight to my FileMaker server, and you're all set. So this is all fine and dandy. But as you can see from the graphic, this works really well if you have outside traffic, right? People out there on the internet, remote workers that need to connect to your server that's in your office. It's what if you have internal users, right? SSL certificates, the reason for using an SSL certificates isn't just for outside traffic, it's for inside traffic too. Actually, I should have brought that up. Let me do that here first. Right? I'm not going to go into that. I just want to have it out there so that you go like, there's a lot of stuff there. So you can go to this at any point. This is a graphic that shows how attacks happen. And a lot of the attacks happen on, so like the middle to right-hand side of that graphic, but it's really all about getting access to your network. So it's going to be rare that you get attacked from the outside. You're going to get attacked from the inside. Something is going to burrow into your network, into your computer, and attack you from there. So remember that's the reason why even internally, like if you have no outside access to your FileMaker server, you don't do web direct from the internet, or you don't do data API from the internet, you want to protect your traffic inside your bubble as well. And that means that if you have an SSL certificate to your FileMaker server and that certificate says fms.domain.com, your internal clients need to use that same name, right? Because that's how you get validation, name validation of your SSL certificate. If you didn't, you'd get a certificate, an SSL error, right? Because if I use an IP address, the certificate says but my name is fms.domain.com. You're calling me by another name. I don't know that name, so I'm going to throw an error. The worst thing that you can do is this, right? Where that name gets validated outside of your network. That really means that all your traffic leaves your network to just come back in. That's going to be horribly slow. And this is a common mistake that we see, right? And this is where people get into trouble with an SSL certificate. So what you really need is some routers can do hairpinning. Some routers are smart enough to say, I see that you want to do this externally, but really it's internal traffic. So I'll basically just turn around and send the traffic back to the internal network. But really, what you need to have is a DNS server of your own, right? Where you can couple that name for internal traffic to an internal IP address. It's okay to still have an external one, right, for external traffic. So there's really no rule that says that you cannot have different DNS servers, each having their own name married to a different IP address. I want to leave that on there. It's all explained in a lot of detail in this one. Like I said, it covers all the basics, what you need, what you don't need, and why you need it. So a lot of that stuff is there. The other thing, this is actually my AI demo. We don't need to get into that. The other consequences is this, right? And this is the other piece where people get stuck, right? Like they want to see their FileMaker server listed here in the local section, right? They have their FileMaker server on their network, and they're used to seeing it in the local section. Under the hood, that uses Bonjour, which is an MDNS. It's like a zero configuration protocol where you basically do a broadcast across your network to say any FileMaker servers out there, echo, 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 that kind of thing. That doesn't work. I'm not going to go into all the details of that, but there's a blog post that talks specifically about that. This is actually an older one, well, a couple of years old, right? So you can't use Bonjour if you have an SSL certificate. That really means that in your FileMaker Pro, you have to configure a favorite host that has the actual name that's on your SSL certificate. That's another a piece that people often miss. And I get it. It's a bit of a deployment hassle, right? Like you got to make sure that all your clients have that. You can provide them instructions on how to do that. Or you can use a launcher file that just has a file reference by the right name already, which is probably the easiest way to do that. But it's a consequence of using an SSL certificate. All right, one more concept on that, and it's sort of like a catch-22, right? If I go out and buy an SSL certificate, I go to a vendor. There's plenty out there, and I say, "Can you please issue me an SSL certificate for wim.soliantconsulting.com?" Right? Wim will be the name of my server. Soliantconsulting.com is the name of my domain. And they'll say, yep, we can do that. They'll do some name validation. They'll do some verification that you actually own or control the Soliantconsulting.com domain. Right? And you can understand why, because otherwise I can ask for an SSL certificate for store.apple.com, right? And then try to impersonate Apple. That doesn't fly, right? Like they're going to check whether I own or control apple.com. I don't. I wish I was, but I don't. So there's a verification process, and that's really at the heart of what we will talk about with this Let's Encrypt thing, right? But they will need to verify that you actually control that domain, and there's a couple of different ways to do that. So say that you pass all that, they issue your certificate, and like I said, the certificate validates. They certify, because that's what a certificate is all about. They certify that the name that they put on the certificate is a valid name, and that whoever has the certificate controls that domain. You can trust them. So that's really what they're saying. Like, you can trust Wim. He's got a certificate of ours. Like, we gave him a certificate, which is fine and dandy, but do you trust the issuer of that certificate? Right? Because they say trust Wim. But then you go like, but do I trust you, institution that gave me the certificate?
And there have been stories about some of those companies getting sideways, right? Maybe not as trustworthy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
absolutely. Because if they start giving out certificates and without doing any checking, right, it's a scary place to be.
There was one company that got, basically they had their entire SSL certificate department shut down. You may have heard of them, Symantec.
Yep.
Basically that business by Symantec was killed, honestly, by Google. That's who did it. They were doing what Wim said. They were issuing certificates for things they shouldn't, because they were not validating things correctly. And so there's consequences for that, is a short version. The business was taken away from them by the community. So
wow.
Yep. So you can see the conundrum a little bit, right? Because my issuer has to be trustworthy. And the way that they prove their trustworthiness is to have their own certificate. We're basically just moving the problem up the chain now, right? Because who's to say that I trust the certificates of whoever gave the certificates to my issuer, right? So at some point, you have to trust somebody. And what it really comes down to is that every single operating system, browsers have them too, some applications have them too, have a set of what is called root certificates, right? Certificates issued by a root certificate authority. These authorities are trusted by everybody, right? Like your Mac OS, your Windows OS, your iOS, they all come with a standard set of root certificates or certificates issued by a root certificate authority. So when I go and buy my certificates, I get a certificate from my issuer, and here's the crucial part: they will give me what is called an intermediate bundle. They'll give me basically a chain of certificates that says you can trust us because we have a certificate, my issuer has a certificate, all the way to a root certificate authority, right? That the concept of chain of trust is important here, right? So because it's through the chain of trust that whoever checks my certificate can say, yep, you have a certificate. I see that your issuer is trustworthy because it go all the way up to a root certificate authority. A chain of trust. You can sort of see that if you go to SSL Labs. At some point, you pointed at one of your servers that has an SSL certificate. They'll give you reports, and one of them is here, certification paths. It's kind of cool, where it says, okay, Mozilla, there's Apple, there's Android. Actually, let's do Apple. Doesn't really change, right? So this is my wildcard certificate, *ets.fm. Wildcard means I can use this certificate on any server that I want. Server 1, ets.fm, server 2, ets.fm, whatever. I just pay for one certificate. I can use it on many servers. And you can see the chain of trust to this one, where it says in trust store, right? So this is the one that is the certificate authority that is being trusted, in this case by Apple, right? So from my certificates to my issuer to a root certificate authority, that's the chain of trust. If that chain of trust is not there, it's not going to work. Like whoever is checking my certificate is going to say, I cannot follow the chain all the way up to a trusted source. Why is this important? Because you can issue your own certificates, right? So there's really no magic to getting a certificate. You can create your own certificate. It's called a self-issued or a self-signed certificate. If you do so, there's really no chain of trust because nobody is going to sign off on the fact that your certificate is trustworthy. You just created it yourself. It's like you took a piece of paper and wrote out the diploma, right? Like that don't work. Like it's fine. It looks nice, but it's not validated. It's not trusted by anybody. And we see that sometimes with companies, right? Where companies want to be their own certificate authority, which is fine. Big companies do. It really means that they have to also create their own root certificate and deploy that to all of their machines. Often they don't, or something goes wrong, and it becomes a big troubleshooting effort. Remember what I said in the beginning. A commercial certificate costs about $5 a year, right? How much time is it worth the troubleshooting that, Richard? Right? Like, how much time can you spend to rack up $5?
Yeah, you're not going to want to. You're not going to want to invest in that. So
exactly, and that's why we say, look, it's worth not even 15 minutes of our time to try and figure out why this is not working. Go out and get a commercial certificate.
Yeah, this is really good. I was not aware that the intermediate is where it bundle all those in there. I'm sure Mr. Taylor told it to me one day, but I don't remember that part. So yeah, that's interesting. Good stuff.
This is often where people fail. Like they get the certificates, and it kind of depends on the vendor. Like some vendors will automatically email you that intermediate bundle, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes you have to go to their website and download it because that intermediate is standard. It applies to all the certificates that they issue, right? So it kind of depends on what vendor you use, whether you get it or you don't get it.
If you turn on the SSL for testing mode in FileMaker Server, that's like a self-signed certificate, right? It's what we're talking about here, right? So it's this. So it's technically encrypted point to point, but the person at the end doesn't necessarily have any reason to trust the server, right? So
that's right.
There's all sorts of issues with that.
And I think Claris's test certificates don't actually have a domain like plugged into them properly, if I'm remembering right. And so there's like your data is encrypted, but you don't get anything else. The name protection is right there.
All right, here we go. So Wim being the guy on the job, here we go. Certificate installed.
This is the same certificate that I just showed you that chain of trust for, right?
So
That's
this
the
is
one
a
that I
good one.
use for.
This is a legit certificate. Okay.
Yep, exactly. Issued by Sectigo, all of that good stuff. When you go to upload a certificate, like you went through the whole process, you got one. So you got to select it. There's a private key. We can get into private keys if people have questions, but you got to do this, right? So this is the bundle that establishes that chain of trust. If you don't do this, and a lot of times people don't, like they got their certificate, they got the private key and said, okay, I'm good to go. They come in here and import these two, but not this one. And then it fails. Like you get an orange log or you get a red log, and it depends on which one you get.
Okay. I was thinking the orange, the yellow, or the intermediate color, right? That one where it's, we kind of trust you, but not really.
Yeah. When you get an orange log, you'll still get the benefit of the encryption, right? Because they'll still, the client and the server will still communicate, and they'll still say, okay, yeah, whatever. We'll make sure that the traffic is encrypted, but you don't have the name validation, meaning you're subject to a man-in-the-middle attack because you're not entirely certain that the person you're talking to or the server you're talking to is the server that you intended to talk to. All right, let's encrypt, right?
So what is Let's Encrypt and why do we care?
Let's Encrypt has been around for a while, right? And as it says on the screen there, it's a nonprofit. They basically said at some point they said everybody should have an SSL certificate. It's that important, right? Because of the benefits that we just talked about. Like everybody should be using them. And they said because it's so crucial to the functioning of pretty much everything that we do, we don't think that's fair that people should have to pay for it. SSL certificates, of course, is big business. And they said, we'll give them out for free, right? So they give really true SSL certificates. Like this is not like a hacky kind of thing where they're not trusted. They are trusted. There have been trust issues with them in the past, right? Because because it's free and it's easy to do and it's fully automated. Let's Encrypt certificates have been used by hackers and attackers because it's really that easy to get them. So there have been trust issues in the past around these kinds of things, but it's a big consortium that does that. And they, in essence, that's really what it comes down to. That's why we're here today. They give out certificates for free. That's really what it is. The process for getting one really is still the same, roughly, as you would have to go through with a commercial SSL provider, meaning you still have to prove that you have control over the domain, specifically the host in their case, that you want a certificate for. Like I cannot use this to get a certificate for store.apple.com because they do the same thing. They say, prove to me that you have control over that domain. So that's what they do. Let's talk about that. Even when you go out and get a commercial certificate, they'll give you options. They'll say, after you lay down your money and you got the rights for an SSL certificate, they say, okay, now it's time to prove that you are who you say you are. Prove to us that you have that you own or that you control that domain. It's not really own. Like I can do this for a client, meaning I have control over the name servers and whatnot. I don't need to own the domain, but you got to have control over it. They basically say we can send you an email, right? They don't let you specify which email to go to. Like they have to pick from a list of preset. Like it's going to be something like admin ad or postmaster ad or something like that. Because otherwise it's too easy to mimic that. They can say, we'll send you an email, or you have to put a particular file on your web server, right? And we'll just go check if that file is there. Or you have to make a DNS record in the DNS server that controls your domain, and we'll go check if that DNS record exists. So those are typically the three ways that you can prove that you have control over that domain. And there's plenty of resources before this new feature that comes from Claris with Server 21 that people have already put this kind of automation together, and they've all chosen this mechanism. This is what is called the HTTP challenge. This is where you put a file on your server, and Let's Encrypt will check if that file exists. Okay, let's talk through how that actually works, right? So the green line is your FileMaker server. The blue line is your network. You may or may not have a firewall on your FileMaker server. Some people do, some people don't. That's a security appetite kind of thing, right? Like a risk appetite. Either you want to protect your server at the server level or you don't, but you'll certainly have a firewall at the edge of your network. That's going to be a given. And we can go over the instructions. Actually, that's right here. Oh, by the way, big caveat. The scripts that Claris provides only work on Mac OS and Ubuntu Linux, right? They haven't created a script for Windows, mainly because it's the same script for Mac OS and because they're both Unix flavors, right? So this is a Ubuntu FileMaker Server 21. If you go to where FileMaker Server is installed, there's a tools folder there. That tools folder has some really nice goodies into it, right? So there's a Let's Encrypt folder in there. That one holds the scripts that Claris gives you that you can use to do the initial request to Let's Encrypt for a certificate. There's some the other good things. We'll talk about this later in the week. There, Richard, is the open source LLM. If you want to host your own AI server. Nginx load balancing has been around for a while, totally underused. Not many people use it. It's a great feature. Same with admin API, PKI auth, right, where you can do key-based access to your admin console. Anyway, Let's Encrypt. So it's there. Claris chose the same HTTP challenge, right? So if you read the README that comes with those instructions, they'll say, go and install certbot. Certbot is a small agent that gets installed on your FileMaker server. The agent is responsible for the communication to and from Let's Encrypt. Right? Let's Encrypt uses a particular protocol. It's called ACME. Jacob and I were chuckling about this week, right? Because ACME for me, it's like that's the Roadrunner movie.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Whenever you buy stuff,
I saw that. I didn't
ACME,
understand that. Okay, so is that over a certain port number, or is it just port 80 or 443, or what is it doing?
When certbot communicates with Nginx, actually, let's do that first. Like, let's follow the bullets, right? Like, so 1, 2, 3, and 4. Let's go through that. So you install certbot as part of the initial setup. Certbot will basically create a small file on your web server. When I say your web server, every FileMaker server comes with a web server, right? It's just part of it. On Windows, it uses IIS. macOS is Apache. Ubuntu, it's Nginx. So FileMaker Server is a web server, really, right? So certbot will create a small file in a particular folder on your Nginx that's part of FileMaker Server.
Okay.
That's number one, right? So that's bullet number one here. Then certbot will basically tell Let's Encrypt, here's my request. And by the way, I put that file there. So you can go check whenever you want. So at this stage of the communication, ports don't play a role because it's traffic that originates from your FileMaker server to Let's Encrypt. Everything's fine, assuming that your server is allowed to access the
Nginx is, yeah.
When Let's Encrypt receives your request for a particular domain name, it'll then, that's number 3 here, right? So 1 and 2 is certbot, but number 3 here, that's the crucial part. Because Let's Encrypt will need to check your FileMaker server to see if that file is there.
This is the test.
This is the test, right? This is where it basically passes or fails. If it fails, they're not issuing you a certificate. But in order for this to work, it has to traverse 1 or 2 firewalls. At the edge of your network, you have to open port 80. This only works on port 80. So you may be asking, why not port 443? Well,
we don't have the SSL yet.
There you go.
Yeah.
Right. So it's got to be port 80. So this firewall and router, by extension, I'm using firewall for router, sort of like I'm throwing this together. Yeah. But there's got to be a hole punched in your firewall for port 80, and the traffic has to be forwarded to your FileMaker server. If you have a firewall on your FileMaker server, the script that Claris has written, they actually did that really well, will temporarily open port 80 and then close it when it's done. So they did that well, right? So they did that well. The issue is not going to be here, right? So the issue is going to be there, because clearly Claris, or the script that Claris writes, cannot open that port. Like that would be crazy if they could do that. That is somebody on the networking side. If you, as the FileMaker developer or FileMaker deployer, have no control over that, you gotta tell somebody to do that. And this is risky, right? Because if somebody makes a mistake, leaves it open, things are going to happen. I don't like it, right? I don't like it one bit. But okay, assuming that this works and Let's Encrypt can verify that the file is on your Nginx server, on your FileMaker server, then basically certbot will basically go in a bit of a loop after it told it Let's Encrypt. Right? So like, have you checked? Have you checked? Have you checked? At some point, Let's Encrypt will say, yep, pass or fail. If it was a pass, then Certbot will download the certificates, and the rest of the Claris script will use the FMS admin command line to import the certificates, and you're good to go. Well, you're good to go. Deploying a certificate to your FileMaker server still requires a restart of your FileMaker server, right? Always has been. That hasn't changed. You still got to do that. So that's still it. So you got to plan for downtime. The other thing to note is Let's Encrypt certificates are valid for 90 days. So you got to go through this cycle every 90 days. Typically, a commercial cert is good for a year. So you only really have to do this once a year.
All right,
Let's
so
Encrypt, you have to do this every 90 days.
Half our audience just shut off their live stream and walked away. 90 days, they don't want to have to be part of that every 90 days. I'm messing with you, Wim, but 90 days is a major downer.
That is what the automation is for.
Can I ask, is there automation here, Wim? Just so I know not to hang up. Okay.
Yep.
Because Jacob said, hey, because we use Let's Encrypt some of our web servers, Wim, at RCC, and I know it's every 90 days and it's automated. Then every once in a while, the automation goes wonky and I start getting distress emails or something. And I'm like, holy. So yeah.
That's actually because Let's Encrypt tells us when that doesn't work.
Yep. That's one of the good things that comes with this, actually, let's go in here real quick on my FileMaker server so that you can see what's there.
You so don't get sorry, Wim, I was just gonna say you're not getting like tech support from Let's Encrypt per se. Like they have a forum or something like that if you're having issues. But what I'm saying in the benefit here is it's free and they'll still tell you if there's a problem if they can see it from their end, basically.
So the two scripts that Claris gave us is basically one for the initial request, and this one you got to go through the script. There's no, it's automated. I'm not saying that, but the other one is for a renew. However, here's the nice thing that they did, right? If you go to your schedules on your FileMaker server, there is a system script schedule category. Again, this has been around for a decade plus, right? It's one of the most, actually, no, it's the script sequence that is the most underused, but system scripts.
Yeah.
And if you go and look, there's these sys default scripts, right? These are baked into your FileMaker server. You don't need to deploy them. You cannot even find them. They're just there. And one of them is called reload a Let's Encrypt certificate.
Oh.
So that makes it really easy to just schedule this. The best practice is to, because you have 90 days, so the initial thought may be, well, I'll schedule it for 89 days, right? The best practice is to run this every day, right? Because
really, okay.
The communication with Let's Encrypt is smart enough to say, you don't need a new certificate. You're fine. Like, it's not going to do anything. But to Jacob's point, if it does fail, you want to give yourself as much runway as you want.
Yes.
Right? Because Let's Encrypt will let you renew a few days ahead of the actual renewal. So if it fails once, it's fine because it'll try again next day and you're still fine. It's rare that it's going to fail so many times in succession that you'll find yourself without a certificate. You don't have to try and guess like when you should be trying to renew. Just fire and forget. Set it for every day. Let it do its thing. It's pretty good at it.
Yep. That's how RCC is all of our websites.
And why wouldn't you, right? So
I don't want to think about.
So this is how Claris built it. And even without the Claris scripts, if you go on the community and you search for Let's Encrypt for FileMaker Server, you'll always find that this is the way that is done, right? And to recap, the reason that I don't particularly like this is this, right? You have to open your firewall. You got to open port 80. Not a big fan. So many chances for this to go wrong. Somebody leave it open, whatever, or it not be open when you need it to be open, right? So remember, like I said, putting a file in your server is just one of the ways that this verification can happen. Like, it's not the only one. Here's the other one, like a DNS challenge. DNS challenge means that you go to your name server, your DNS server for that where your domain is hosted typically, and you basically create a record. You don't have to guess at what record. They will tell you what record what its name should be, what its value should be, right? And just do that. And again, Let's Encrypt is all about automation. So they'll give you the scripts. So you just have to adjust them, and all of that is good. So here's the difference, right? Again, green is my FileMaker server. Blue is my network, got my two firewalls. My little agent I installed on FileMaker Server when it's time to renew will basically, that's number one here. it'll create a DNS record automatically. Then number two, it will tell Let's Encrypt. So Richard, you had a question?
Richard's raising his
I
hand.
have a question. Here we go. You know what's
Yep.
coming. So you just said, so we've covered DNS in some of the shows over the last number of years. And normally we log on to some sort of service provider, whatever, and DNS record. It's basically a text file. So it's an entry in a text file. So we're saying that the CERT bot is going to be allowed to go in and edit that text file, which contains our DNS information for a domain. Is that what you
Yep, pretty much all DNS servers or DNS providers, I should say more than servers, all DNS providers have APIs to a point. Like if you have one that doesn't, ditch it.
Okay. Okay.
Right?
Okay. Every time we trained on it, we do it manually to training, but you could do it through an so CertBot uses an API to it has to do an API to wherever your DNS is, right? Okay.
Exactly. Right. So you basically tell CertBot, like we're using AWS, right? AWS Route 53 has great APIs.
Yeah, we use that.
So you configure your robots, and it's all in that blog post, by the way, like in detail, like how do I set up my Route 53? How do I restrict API access to that? It basically is just allowed to create that one text record. I don't give it rights to mess with the rest of my DNS records. I just give it rights to create one type of record. It's a text record. Nothing else. The CertBot makes an API call to my DNS provider to say, create me a text records in my DNS. Number two, the CertBot agent will tell Let's Encrypt, it's fine, like it's there, go check, right? And then CertBot will basically tell or ask CertBot, have you checked? Have you checked? Or Let's Encrypt, have you checked? At some point, Let's Encrypt will do the same thing, pass, fail. It'll say, I checked, it's the DNS record is exactly what I expected it to be. CertBot will download the certificate, and that's all that there is. There is no traffic that has to traverse my firewall. Everything is outgoing. It's initiated by my CertBot agent. Just like if you're on my network and you do FileMaker traffic, most firewalls these days are stateful, meaning that they allow traffic, incoming traffic that originated from outgoing traffic.
Yes.
Because they said, right? So that's the same thing. I don't need to mess with my security of my network at all. I don't need to punch holes in my firewall. I don't need to do any of those things. And this is just built in.
Questions from anyone? Duggan says port 80 or port 480? We're port 80. So port 80 is HTTP web traffic that's unencrypted. Port 443, if you have an SSL running on a web server, then that would be encrypted traffic. So we haven't deliberately said the word 480 today. It's either 80 or 443. Previously, we were just showing how it would work with 80, but now Wim is describing how CertBot doesn't have to use that. It can do it directly around, and so we don't have to worry about the firewall being adjusted, or frankly, fighting a battle with the IT department that we have to have port 80 open for a week, and they're just going to, frankly, they're going to shit their pants and say no. And then they'll quit responding to your emails and phone calls, and then your customer's unhappy. So, yes.
For me, this is by far the more secure way to do this. Right?
I agree.
Because you don't mess with your security, and even in a small way. So you could ask yourself, why didn't Claris pick this? Well, the thing is that the API call, the initial API call, will vary by DNS provider. Like AWS does it one way, Osos will do it another way, GoDaddy will do it another way. So there isn't a one way to do this that works for all DNS providers. So I get the reasoning for wanting to put something out there that is generic. I just want to counter that by saying that's fine. Let's educate people on how to do the same thing in a different way, so that you can choose. The main takeaway from this is you get to choose, right? Like if your risk appetite, like if you're happy with this, like if you don't see a risk there, by all means, right? Like I'm not going to say that you shouldn't do this. I'm telling you, I'm not going to do this. I like my security, and I'll do it this way.
All right, Jacob, you want to take that question real quick? It came in. It was a good question from Schmiegel. Let me ask the question. If FileMaker Server has an SSL, do we not need port 80 open?
Technically, no. My answer to him on Discord, though, is that FileMaker Server 21 actually does not have port 80 open, at least on Ubuntu. Maybe Wim can answer the other platforms, but it's closed. Like you set it up, it closes the port for you if it's open or whatever. It sets the firewall up in a secure way for you. And then he mentioned earlier, actually, when we were going through the HTTP checking process, it will temporarily open port 80 FileMaker Server will temporarily open port 80 so that the Let's Encrypt can come in and check the file and do stuff, and then it'll close it back down again when it's done.
Just for clarification, Wim, so this slide right here, I understand how we discussed this. To initiate, okay, so once we have the initiation, then we have the renewal. Do we need this slide right here to the initiate, or can we do the initiation, everything on the other slide where it's going, we're not going through the port number? Can we do the initiation? Well, obviously the renewal, so that we can do the whole thing with this diagram is my question.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, and feel free to ask conceptual questions on SSL certificates, on the why and the how and all of that good stuff, right? I think it's really important that people thoroughly understand all everything there. So these are the two scripts that Claris provided, right? So they're there, actually the requests. There's a couple of things there that you need to configure. It's nothing major that's in there. It's a really nicely written script. So this is well done. Here they are, right?
I like the commenting. That's nice.
You got some options like this is where you would put the name of what you want on certificates, your email address. Because to Jacob's point, the email address is coupled to that. Like if something goes wrong in that whole process, they will email you. So they're pretty good at this, right? So this is why this is important. And the other thing is that you would typically set the test certificate to 1, right? Like you until you get it just right, you're hitting Let's Encrypt a sandbox, right? So that they don't go through the process of trying to actually get you a certificate until all your scripts and your infrastructure is fully working, right? So it's exactly the same thing. It's the same kind of feedback that you get on the command line, except that they don't actually send you a certificate until you flip this to 0 when you're ready for the actual deployment.
All right, so you build it, you test it with test certificate equal 1, sandbox mode. QuickBooks is like that. For those of you know about do QuickBooks integration, that kind of thing. You do a sandbox mode with QuickBooks, and then when you think it's functional working, you turn it live.
Yep, exactly. In the blog post, you'll find basically my version of that same script. It's on the GitHub repo. It's open. People can download the same thing. I basically I took the same script. I took Claris script and basically modified a little bit. I took the configuration stuff out, right? So as you can see here in the Claris scripts, they're hidden about 50 lines deep. I took it out and put it in its own config file so that you wouldn't have to go find it. And then that's pretty much it, right? So
that was basically I wouldn't even call it a complaint, but you got to go down. There's it's a full screen into the script before you get into the settings. And I was trying to figure out where are the settings, and I started reading the script, and then I was like, oh, here's the configuration. Okay. But in general, you'd put stuff like that up at the top, or as Wim has done, you'd split it out into its own thing.
Exactly. Like if you're not familiar with shell scripting, and like what Jacob said, typically you would expect it at the top, right? And so you open the script fully expecting to configure something, and you go like, this is like, what am I doing here, right? Until you get to line 55. It's obvious once you find it, so that's really not it. But it's a little odd that they didn't do that. I expect them at some point to write a PowerShell equivalent for the Windows folks that want to do this, or the community will, right? Like it's this. When you look at these scripts, like this is actually one of those learning moments. Like if you know that shell scripting or OS level scripting is something that you're interested in, or you wish that you knew. Like if you want Let's Encrypt on the Windows side, or even on the Mac OS and Ubuntu side, and you want to customize this, like let be the impetus for you to go like, okay, I'm finally going to get through the learning curve on these things, right? Like you just got to have the driver to do this, and this may just be it. You can download my scripts and look at them from GitHub and go play with them.
To clarify, your scripts, were they part of that link pack, Margaret? You dropped that link on there. It's a Soliant link blog post.
So this is the blog post specifically about why I'm doing the DNS stuff.
Okay.
So it's got the same diagrams in there, so you'll recognize it. There's a link in there somewhere to my GitHub repo, right? So and it basically goes like very detailed. Like this is the configuration. This is why I'm setting. This is why I'm setting it. So it does all of this stuff, so you can just follow along. And like even if you have a different DNS provider than I do, like I said, I'm using AWS because we're big in AWS at Soliant. If you have Ionos or GoDaddy or anybody else, they have APIs. Go check them out. They're usually very easy to work with because they want them to be easy to work with, right? Like they want to help you automate and be safe. Yeah, I can take questions, or we can pivot to something else on server.
I still have questions about the process because you kind of have to do the automated FileMaker server restart to get this done, and we have concerns with that as an idea. So, but
Automated FileMaker. Do we want to air that out
Yeah.
here, or is that something you guys take offline? Or
No, I think it's fine to air it here. It's ever since we got custom SSL certificates, it requires a restart of FileMaker server. Not per se a reboot of the machine. You can do that too if you want to, but you got to restart the FileMaker server service or daemon, right?
Oh, so every 90-day thing, is that what we're talking about? Every 90
Yeah.
days, a restart?
So that
Completely
means that
automated.
you have to plan it out. Like you have to have a maintenance window that you can kick people out, right? And the automation around that is available because there you have admin APIs, you have admin command line to kick people out and send messages to them. The whole process end to end becomes a little more complicated, right? Because you it's fine to automate it, but you have to build in error trapping and handling, right? Like okay, so you go to kick off clients. So you send them a message and you start disconnecting them. What if that fails? Like, what do you do? Because and that's not like an IT question. That's more like a business question. Like, do we forcefully kick people out or not? Right? Because then you have to back out because you give yourself. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have the question on this. So I understand it's absolutely so when you kick people out. We can talk about that because that's another interesting topic from actually yesterday a little bit. So let's just walk through. So I get this going. Say I'm Richard and I'm not very bright. I'm gonna get this going, and I set it up to check every day. And Let's Encrypt says yes, it's good. Yes, it's good. So it gets to day 85, whatever the window is, where it'll actually try to actively. So it says yes, you are now authorized to have this new certificate in it. The role cert bot gets it, or however that happens. It arrives on my FileMaker server, and so the new certificate is there, but it won't take effect until the server does a restart. Is that a true statement?
Yes.
So it's there, but it doesn't take effect until you restart. Okay, yes. Okay, sorry. I just want to make sure that it wasn't waiting to download. So we have it. It's just not in effect. It's like okay.
Basically, FileMaker server, the process, FM server D, if you want to be annoying, only, at least historically and still, only loads SSL at start, like during program initialization. Honestly, there are not bad reasons for that, but it has a side effect here, which is we must reboot the software to get it to load a new cert.
So every 90 days we have to do a restart. And so Wim, I got a question. So is there any way for us to FileMaker server to know that the process has been successful? Because we don't want to do a restart if it hasn't successfully, or do we want to force a restart at day 89 or something? I mean, what does that look like?
The way that these scripts are built is that they will only initiate the FileMaker server restart if the certificate has been properly downloaded and everything's fine. Like it's not going to say it's day 81 and I can, and it'll start the process, fail to download the certificate and still reboot. Like that's not going to happen.
Okay.
So it's smart enough. Yeah, it's smart enough to know like I have the certificate.
What is specifically smart enough? Is it one of those system scripts you were looking at? What are we talking about?
Yes, it's that script, the script that Claris wrote.
So the renew script is what you're saying. So if we fire that and it says it's successful, say it's day 87 for whatever reason it's successful, then it's going to, okay, where's the part where it says, hey, let's restart? Oh, there it is. Oh, I'm trying to figure out. So it figures out
it's right here.
Oh yeah, here we go. So then we're going to do a restart, but then we have to wait to see if people disconnect. And then, but wait a minute, back up a second. So the restart would happen around the time that we run the scripts. We wouldn't want to run this script until, like, I'm just talking out loud, 2 in the morning or something, right? Something.
Yep. And you bring up a really good point, like, because typically when we work with IT departments and we tell them, because maybe they do a maintenance reboot every month or every 3 months or whatever, we tell them, go through the process, like just don't do this, right? Don't just restart the FileMaker server because there may be clients connected, the files are still open. So the proper process is first disconnect the clients and then see what happens, right? Because if that doesn't work, you got to stop all the rest that you're doing and go fix that. Like you got to figure out what's wrong.
Yeah.
Assuming that all the clients are disconnected, the next thing is close all the files and then check if that works. If that didn't work, you got another problem, right? You got to stop everything else and figure out, like, why is my file not closing? That's that's a big red flag right there. Like this is probably a file in bad health, or your FileMaker server is in bad health. But like you got to build in these stop points along the way and handle them. Like it's one thing to just stop and send out an email, but from a business perspective, and that's why you can't really make rules around this. Like you can trap for the event and say, this happened. What do I do with this? Right? The what do I do with this is going to be dependent for one client versus the other one. But you got to have something. You got to know what you want to do in that scenario.
Okay, so let me ask a question. So we can tell the clients to disconnect, and then the new feature in Server 21 is the ability to not allow new people to connect, right? Like we talked about yesterday. For those who were here yesterday, you tell everyone to disconnect, and you have a salesperson who doesn't listen to you, and he reconnects anyway, right? And so it's blocked new users. Can we automate that as part of that script in there and fire that off?
And trying to recall, I think there's an admin API call for the block, but I don't think that there's a command line. So yes, you can automate it, right? Like if you wanted to build that in, you could do that.
Yeah, you'd want to shut down.
You turn it on, do the
turn it on, and tell the customer,
do the boot, close the files, and then you have to do that entire thing in, well, probably not in reverse completely, because some of it will come up automatically when the thing turns on.
The unblock would be the last thing, right? Because typically if you have multiple files in your server and they operate as a unit, as a solution, you don't want to get in a scenario where all your files except one opens and now people are working happily thinking that everything's fine and it really isn't. Right?
Oops. Yeah. So that script that we got there that you've modified a little bit, we want to, well, most people here are not going to be able to go in there and hack their way through that. Is it the intent of you or Jacob or the community to take that script and make it more robust for the normal person, or does it really have to be customized for each person? Seems like there's some basic rules here, right?
Yep. I have it on my to-do list to at least build in those checkpoints, right?
Yeah.
You gotta trap for it. The handling is somewhat customer specific, but at least if the script has the checkpoints, then people can go like, well, in this block I got to do something, right? And very often because of the scripts, it's just probably going to be some sort of escalation, right? To say I'm going to stop doing what I'm doing and I'm going to email Jacob. Right? It's like it's Jacob's problem.
Call my cell phone immediately. Send me a text message, something. Yeah, good stuff. Wow, this is good. Mike says high level today. Thanks for presenters. This is really good. Yep. So tomorrow, Mr. Wim, are we going to be back tomorrow? You coming back for one more day?
I am.
It is awesome. For those of you, it's the first time we've actually had folks from Soliant here, but highly talented individuals you can see. And this was the perfect level because I got value out of it. I think I used myself as a benchmark, as a kind of a guinea pig. And if I am not totally confused and lost, and that's helpful. Some of you probably could have presented on this today as well. If you have comments, you want to say thank you or something, put a note in here because that will really help Wim know that he was providing value. If he doesn't feel like if he feels that you all don't care, then he ain't ever going to come back again. So we want to make sure that he feels loved. Loved and appreciated would be great. Well, Peter Gaines says, Wim can come back every day. Get rid of Richard. Okay, good. Thanks, Peter. Great job with that. Schmigel says, thank you, Wim. Topcat says, thank you. Mikey, yep, everyone's loving this. All right, cool. We'll pick it up tomorrow. So, Wim, if you think about this, you want to, if there's anything you want to hit on tomorrow, and then we have open Q&A. So all of you have FileMaker Server, open Q&A tomorrow. Please come. Okay? Yes.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Wim.